We're back with more Tapped Out with Brendan Tobin and Sean Levine on the BetQL network.
Welcome back into the show. I'm the sports machine, Sean Levine. That there is Brendan Tobin, and he's no longer just good enough for me, so I need to welcome on somebody that is. Andrew Gombas joins us. You can follow him at Bets and Picks MMA. Let's talk some MMA, Andrew. We were talking a little bit, very briefly, last week, and I believe that we brought up the Chandler McGregor fight, which is official. BT and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. I just don't see this one going that long. Like, Conor McGregor's never been good, anything past, I'd say, the second round, really. If McGregor wins, it has to be in the first couple of rounds, right?
Yeah, the one time he had to dig deep was in a 5-rounder against Nate Diaz, but other than that, it's been mostly quick fights. The first Poirier fight was done in a round. The Jose Aldo fight was obviously done in 13 seconds. Eddie Alvarez, 2 rounds, just to name a few. Even, when he lost to Dustin Poirier, he lost to Dustin the first time, it was in the second round. So to your point, he knows he doesn't get paid by the hour. Always in exciting fights, and Michael Chandler is not much different. He's probably the perfect dance partner to meet him in the center and see who's going to hold up longer.
Andrew, coming up, UFC 301, not, in the ilk of the other cards. I actually feel like I've been a little bit like boxing centric this week because I've been out in Vegas for the Canelo fight, but I feel like on the outskirts of this, I'm seeing a lot of like Steve Erceg. Hey, this is why you guys should be excited to see him against Pantoja. He is a dog in the swing. So, like, what are the things about the championship fight that excites you? How you betting it? What are the most intriguing things about the matchup?
Yeah, well, it's an intriguing matchup in my eyes because we don't fully know what Erceg is yet. A lot of guys don't get a title fight in their 4th fight in the organization, and obviously Pantoja is a big step up from anything he's ever faced before. Like I said, Erceg, 3 fights in the UFC, he's 3-0. But the 3 people he's fought have a combined 10-11 UFC record, whereas Pantoja has fought and beaten like the killers of the killers. He's beaten Moreno 3 times. He's beaten Royval twice. And this is just, a new test for him because obviously, he's faced a lot of the toughest that the division has to offer. And he's had mostly good results. I think off the top of my head, he's 11-3 in the UFC, which is phenomenal given the strength of schedule he's faced. Obviously, there's a couple things on the Erceg side that he has going for him. He's 7 years younger. He's bigger. Erceg's very big for a flyweight. He's a good striker. We saw in his last fight that he has power, like serious power in his hands. He seems to be a capable grappler, but Pantoja is one of the best jiu-jitsu players in the UFC, let alone just the 125-pound division. And Pantoja never been finished. He's a dog. We've seen him dig deep in fights before. I don't think we've necessarily seen Erceg have to dig deep late in a fight, especially in a main event title fight, 5 rounds. So I got to give those advantages to Pantoja. I am expecting him to get it done and retain his belt.
What if my BetMGM account is not that big and I'm trying to hit an underdog at UFC 301? I'm looking at Potiera at 5-1, Lionheart Anthony Smith 4-1, Bearju Paul Craig at plus 450. If you got to play an underdog, which one are you going with?
Yeah, it's not a sexy pick, but I think William Gomis should be the favorite. And the line's has moved some throughout the week in his favor, but I do think he should be the favorite here. In my opinion, he's more skilled. He's much better defensively. He has 3 actual UFC wins, whereas Gene Silva, fought on the Contender Series and had a very close fight, got in the UFC, fought someone who's not in the UFC anymore. I think Gomis has the leg kick upside. Like I said, I think he's better defensively. I just all around think he has a better process. And Silva is powerful, but like I said, Gomis is just so hard to hit. I think he should be the favorite here. And you did mention a few big underdogs. If I had to pick one, it would probably be Anthony Smith, just because Anthony Smith, he's well-rounded. He's fought a who's who of the division. And, he probably is past it a little bit, but I think that's being more than accounted for, more than baked into the line already. Just a year or 2 ago, Vitor Petrino was a pick'em with Anton Turkalj, who, is no longer with the UFC. And yeah, it's a step up for Petrino, and I'm not suggesting for you that Smith's going to win, but I do think the line's probably wide.
There's been an interesting back and forth this week, Andrew, with Alex Bejeda where, there's been some flirtation that maybe he's going to go up to heavyweight. People are even thinking there's going to be like a Royal Rumble situation where he was going to come in the midst of 301. Then he says this week, maybe I'll focus at 205. Then John Jones is like now putting out the idea, maybe fighting Tom Aspinall or Pereira at some point. What do you think? Pereira has that monster knockout at 300, maybe got a little overshadowed by Holloway, but he's obviously, got options just like Max Holloway does. What would you like to see for Alex Pereira's next challenge?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because to your point, he has so many options. He could rematch Yuri. He could go up to heavyweight. He could look to fight Aspinall. He could look to fight John Jones. He could potentially do another Adesanya fight, but this time at 205. For me, I'm interested in the idea of someone challenging for a third belt. And there's no one at 205 besides Ankalaev that I'm like, oh wow, this guy might really, be a top 10 pound for pound fighter who should absolutely be fighting for the title. So, if there's a time to try to be now, I think it's a win-win situation for the UFC because whoever wins that fight is going to become a bigger star than they were before. Obviously, if Pereira wins, he's a three-weight world champ, which has literally never been done before. And on the Aspinall side, he's got a little bit of a backing from his community, from his crowd, but a win over Pereira, who's becoming a household name in the sport, would do wonders for his career.
Talk a little fighting here with our boy Andrew Gombas, Bets and Picks MMA, joining us here on the BetQL network. BT mentioned there real quick, like Max Holloway has options. What do you think is the best next option for Max Holloway? So there's a bunch of different ways he could go.
Yeah, it's another really interesting one because there's talk about him going back down to 145 and fighting Ilya Topuria, which, to me is extremely interesting because Max Holloway was known as one of the best featherweights of all time. He really just couldn't get past Volkanovski was his main, his Achilles heel, so to speak. And Topuria, I've been hyping this guy up from the day he got into the UFC. And at 145, there aren't really any clear contenders that should be next outside of Max. So to me, that matchup makes sense. But if I'm Max, I'm like, I just went up to 155 and put on a really, really clean performance, have a lot of momentum there. I actually think 155 is probably better for him at this point in his career, which is something I wouldn't have said 5 years ago. I thought 145 was perfect for him given, his size, his cardio. When he went up against Poirier, he was landing more strikes than Poirier, but the power difference was evident. Now I kind of think at this point in his career, it's a good fit for him at 155, and he has some momentum there. He beat a guy who was who fought for the belt recently, so he could catapult himself into conversations at 155 too. There's certainly some interesting matchups to be made, but either route he takes, I think is going to be a good one for him, which is nice to see because he's obviously like put everything into the sport over the last 10, 15 years and had a lot of ups, but had some downs recently. And over the last few years, he's shown that, just because he couldn't get past the Volkanovski test, that he's not going anywhere. We saw him beat Arnold Allen over 5 rounds. We just saw him, knock Justin Gaethje out. 2 really, really solid guys in their respective divisions. So it's just been, it's been pretty incredible to see how long he's hung around the top of the sport because a lot of guys don't do that. It comes and goes for a lot of guys. It's hard enough to get on top, but to stay on top is really hard. And, he's been one of the top guys in those middle divisions for a long time now. So I'm looking forward to whatever he does next.
You know who he is, BT? He's Taylor Swift. Like, he's been the man for a long time, but there were a lot of other ones. But now he's got a chance. If he fights for a championship belt next, and then he's got the BMF belt and another belt around his shoulder, he's the biggest dude in the game.
What?
Am I wrong?
What is the Taylor Swift thing? I don't really understand the comparison. When was she not on top?
She wasn't this big. Like the last couple of years, she's become it. She was always big, but there was the other ones. There was Beyonce. There were other
as a man with a 12-year-old daughter, I can tell you she hasn't had a lot of lulls, dude.
All right. Well, I'll take your word for it. As a guy with no kids, what do you got?
For me though, like I guess since we're going to talk about guys who are have longevity to him. Jose Aldo's a dog this week. Do you like his value there as a dog this week against Martinez, or do you like Martinez in this one?
It's a really tough one for me to call. I don't have strong conviction. I kind of lean towards Martinez just because the age, the activity. Aldo retired a couple years ago. He's coming back now. And obviously Aldo's had an incredible career. It's gone on for a really long time. It's just so rare you see people come back from a retirement and look good, especially, against a guy like Martinez, who isn't an easy matchup for anyone. Um, yeah, it's a tough one because, in his prime, I think this would be a good fight for Aldo because, it's a striker who's going to look to leg kick battle with someone who historically is one of the all-time great leg kickers, or should I say was, because he kind of went away from the leg kicks later in his career, but Prime Aldo had some of the best leg kicks ever. So it's going to be interesting to see if he wants to trade leg kicks, if he goes back to that style, how he's going to look to mix it up, because Martinez has been looking really good lately. He's been building some momentum. For me, just the activity of him, I have to lean towards him, even though I do expect it to be a close competitive fight. You never really see someone dominantly outstrike Aldo. And although Martinez is a good fighter, the people who have outstruck Aldo over like long periods of time would be like a Max Holloway. It hasn't really happened for someone who's not a champion. So it's going to be interesting. A lot of it depends on where Jose Aldo's at. It's really hard for me to tell. I like active fighters. I like activity a lot. I think Martinez is in a good spot. His career trajectory is in obviously a much different place than Aldo's right now. So I'm going to pick him to win, but it's a good fight. I fully expect it to be close.
Speaking of Jose Aldo Jr., we're talking with Andrew Gombas here on the BetQL network. I heard that he fought Conor McGregor one time. Do you think if Conor ends up beating Chandler, back to where I was a couple of minutes ago, I still got it on the mind. Do you think there's any chance that Conor would fight for the belt next? Because that's got to still be Dana's dream somewhere in there.
Yeah, I definitely do.
Really? Okay.
The way they're teeing it up, it's kind of perfect. Makhachev's going to fight Poirier in June, and then McGregor's going to fight Chandler a few weeks later. Obviously, there's a great storyline no matter who wins that Islam versus Poirier fight. I'm not saying that that's the route I would go, or I think that's what should happen, but
Islam's storyline would be nuts with the connection to Khabib, and like that would be the best. It could, because he's already fought Poirier a bunch. Like I'm a little bit over that one.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think they'd look to make it. They have a built-in, I don't want to say excuse, but a storyline, I guess is a better word, regardless
Good
of,
point.
the Poirier one ended in a leg break, the obviously backstory with the Makhachev and Khabib thing. For me, I mentioned last time that McGregor was the reason I, went from being just like a casual fan to ending up, doing this for a career. And it's tough because he was so good, like back in the day. I sound old saying that. In his prime, he was so good, one of the pound for pound, guys in the sport at the time. It sucks talking about it in 2024, and he's not even really like a fighter in my eyes anymore. He's more of like a celebrity who used to be a fighter.
Sure.
So it's a little bit of nostalgia talking about him being in the title. It's just weird talking about him being in like any title conversation. But to the point I made earlier, like it's not far fetched, and I actually think that's the route they'll go if he does beat Michael Chandler. It's weird times. I will admit that the sport is better with him in it, even though he's past his prime. It's just tough to watch as like a fan of like the guy, the 2014 to 2017 Conor McGregor, who, took the world by storm, beat a who's who, and elevated mixed martial arts to the next level. But I'll be watching in a couple of months.
I think everybody will be. Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I'm curious to see what Conor looks like, and all the public money is going to be dumped in on him. So I'll probably put my money on Michael Chandler. When that fight comes around, we will bring you back on. You're one of our best friends of Tapped Out. He is Andrew Gombas. Bets and Picks MMA if you want to follow him. That's Brendan Tobin. I'm the sports machine, Sean Levine. Coming up next, we talk a little more fighting and we make a little bit more money together right here on the BetQL network.